I work part-time at a diner, but my tuition is pretty expensive, so I've had to take on a couple side gigs to stay afloat. About a year ago, I started babysitting for some of my family friends. It's an easy job, and I usually have time to catch up on my homework. Last month, I started having car problems, so I needed some extra money fast. My aunt told me that her coworker was in need of a babysitter, but the house was in Golden Valley, which is a pretty sketchy area outside the city. I normally wouldn't go to a place like Golden Valley, but I really needed the money, so I said yes. The house was on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere, and it wasn't even a house. It was a double-wide trailer behind a bunch of broken-down cars. I felt very unsafe. It was already nighttime when I arrived. I knocked on the door, and a young couple answered. They both smiled at me, but I could tell by their expressions that they weren't expecting me to be black. There aren't a lot of people of color in our city, and I doubt that there are any in Golden Valley. Besides, my aunt is white, and I guess they assumed I would be too. They nervously invited me inside and gave me a quick tour. Their baby, Benji, was already asleep in his room. All I had to do was check on him every 20 minutes. It seemed like an easy gig. Then, the wife stopped at the door to one of the other bedrooms. My heart sank. There was a large Confederate flag on the door. She looked at me sheepishly and told me to stay out of that room. "Why?" I asked, assuming that they had some racist crap inside. The husband explained, "My dad's in there. He's old and feeble, so we don't trust him with Benji. Just don't disturb him, okay?" "I definitely won't," I told them. I just hoped he stayed in there and didn't bother me. The couple looked at each other nervously, then wished me luck and left. I sat on their dusty sofa and studied for my next econ test. Every 20 minutes, I popped my head into Benji's room. He slept peacefully. Everything was going well, until I heard a loud noise outside the trailer, as if someone had dropped something big and heavy. There were voices, too. I know I should have ignored it, but the voices got louder, and I could hear one guy shout, "Hurry up! They'll be home soon!" Whatever was happening outside, it wasn't good. These people were paying me to protect their child, and I couldn't just ignore this. I got out my phone to call the police, but we were out in the mountains, and I couldn't get any reception. I looked for a landline, but they didn't have one. I had to go out there myself. I slowly opened the front door and peered out. I saw 3 men loading up tires and car parts onto the back of their truck. They were robbing the place. "Hey!" I shouted. "What are you doing?" The 3 men turned to look at me. If they got any closer, I'd slam the door shut and lock it. I didn't realize that a 4th man was right next to the door. He grabbed me by my hair and pulled me out of the trailer. He threw me to the ground and stood over me. He had a long pipe that he waved back and forth. "What are you doing here?" he shouted. I was too scared to speak. The other men gathered around me too. They were giggling. They started saying horrible things to me, things I won't repeat. The man with the pipe walked closer. He looked like he was ready to attack. And then I heard a loud bang. The man froze. He dropped the pipe. I saw red spreading across the sleeve of his shirt. Then he crumpled onto the ground, holding his arm and whimpering. An old man, at least 80, stood in the doorway, holding a shotgun. "Get off my property," he growled. The 3 men grabbed their fallen friend and pulled him into the back of the truck. Within seconds, they drove off. I slowly got to my feet. I held up both my arms. The old man looked at me. He held his gun to the side. "Who are you?" he asked. I was terrified. This Confederate psycho was going to kill me. I never should have come here. "I'm the babysitter," I whispered. The old man looked at me for a long moment. I gulped. I had no idea what he was going to do. Then he said, "Well then, come inside. I think I might have woken Benji." He put his gun into the holster on his belt and held the door open. Slowly, I lowered my arms. I walked back in, and the old man closed and locked the door behind me.
"Sorry about all that,"
he said.
"but if you ever hit trouble on my property, come and get me, okay?"
Then he poured me some iced tea while I rocked Benji back to sleep. This whole experience was not at all what I expected. And even though I knew the neighborhood was dangerous, I felt absolutely comfortable inside their trailer. I've babysat for them 3 more times since. My name is Jesse, and I've been babysitting for the family next door since I was 14. They have a girl named Maggie, who's 6 now. She's really cute, and she's usually not too difficult. I only get $15 an hour, but every little bit helps as I save up for college next year. Last week, Maggie's mom called me up to ask if I could watch Maggie on Saturday. I was planning to hang out with a couple of friends at the movies, so I told her no. Pretty soon afterwards, I found out that my ex-boyfriend Ethan was going to the movies too, and I did not want to see that psycho again. So I canceled on my friends and agreed to babysit. That was a huge mistake. I got to the house at 7. Maggie's parents were running late as always, so they scurried around trying to get ready for some work party or something. They barely had time to talk to me before they hurried off. As they left, the mom told me that she left a note on the refrigerator with important information. I assumed it was the usual emergency contacts and stuff, so I didn't bother checking it out right away. At first, things were going great. Maggie was playing with her Legos. I sat on the couch and watched her. She told me about the castle she was building, and I pretended to listen. Then, out of nowhere, she stopped and whispered,
"There's a man outside. He's watching you."
I looked out the window, but I didn't see anyone. The trees were shaking a little. It could have been someone hiding in the shadows, or it could have just been the wind. We live in a pretty nice neighborhood, so I wasn't too worried.
"It's okay,"
I told Maggie.
"It's just the wind." "But that man was looking right at you,"
she said.
"He was scary."
My blood ran cold. Maybe she was right. I walked to the front door and made sure that it was locked and deadbolted. It was. Then I saw a movement in the yard. Someone was definitely out there, sneaking around.
"I think it's a psycho murderer,"
Maggie said blankly.
"It's not a psycho murderer,"
I told her. But just in case, I needed to find out. I unlocked the door and slowly pulled it open. Their yard was filled with trees, so there were a lot of shadows outside, a lot of places for people to hide. I didn't see any movements though.
"Hey!"
I shouted.
"Who's out there?"
There was no answer, but I saw some movement from the bushes. And then I heard some laughing. That's when I knew that it was Ethan, my ex. It had to be. He was so desperate to get back together with me that he had followed me here. What was his plan? I turned toward Maggie and told her to wait right there. I said that my friend was outside and I was going to go out there and tell him to go away.
"Don't go,"
Maggie urged me.
"It's okay,"
I said.
"I'll be right back."
I walked through the dark yard. When I reached the bushes in the corner, I heard more laughter. It was very quiet, as if Ethan was covering his mouth while he laughed.
"Ethan,"
I said,
"what the hell are you trying to do? We are not getting back together."
The laughter stopped. Then, someone whispered, "I'm not Ethan." I gulped. That was definitely not Ethan's voice. I had to get back inside. I turned around, ready to run, but a hand shot out of the bushes and grabbed me by the ankle. I tripped and fell to the ground. Then, the man jumped out of the bushes. He was tall and thin, wearing a hospital gown. He looked furious.
"What are you doing in my house?"
He stood over me, inching closer. He reached forward, trying to grab me by the neck, but I twisted out of the way and stumbled back toward the front door. I ran inside and slammed the door behind me. As I twisted the lock, that man started pounding on the other side of the door.
"Let me in!"
he screamed.
"It's my house!"
I raced over toward Maggie and took her into the bathroom. It seemed like the safest place to hide. We locked ourselves in, and I called the police. After a few minutes, the knocking stopped. The house was very quiet. Maggie kept asking me what was happening, but I didn't have any answers for her. I had no idea who this man was and why he thought he lived here. Maggie was sobbing, and all I could do was tell her that the police would get here soon. But after 10 minutes, the police still weren't there. I needed to go back out and see if the man was still waiting for us outside. I left Maggie in the bathroom and told her to lock the door after me. I walked around the empty house, looking for any signs of that man. I didn't see anything. When I got to the kitchen, I noticed the note that Maggie's mom had left for me on the fridge. I don't know why I decided to read it at that moment. I had other things to worry about, but I did anyway. It said,
"Dinner's in the freezer, just microwave it. And if you see anyone trespassing, call the police right away. My brother was just released from the hospital, and he's been sending threatening notes. Don't tell Maggie, I don't want her to get scared. He probably won't come here, but just in case, do not go outside." Just then, there was a loud knock on the door. The police had finally arrived. I told them everything that had happened. Then, I called Maggie's parents to tell them to come home early. They paid me double, but I told them I wouldn't babysit for them anymore. When I was a teenager, not yet allowed to work, I made my money the old-fashioned way, babysitting. It wasn't much, but that was how my parents decided I would purchase my own vehicle. I started doing it when I was 14, just around our house. Then, when I turned 15, I was able to branch out more and earn more clients. I still remember one family in particular that I babysat for only once. Once was enough to know that I never wanted to go back, no matter how much they paid me. The family lived only 2 streets over. I only gained them as potential clients when their mom mentioned to mine that they hadn't had a kid-free night since moving into our town. My mom knew that I was never stingy with who I worked for, so she gave them our number, and she called me the next weekend. I wasn't new to babysitting, and they only had 2 children, neither of them requiring diapers. I felt it was going to be a cakewalk. When they offered me $20 an hour, a whole $10 more than I was used to, I didn't think twice. It was their anniversary after all. My mom drove me to their house the following Saturday evening. She gave me the normal spill that every parent gives their daughter before letting them watch a stranger's children, a conversation that this family would soon repeat out of habit. Mostly, I zoned out as I stared at the outside world passing by. Typical teenage attitude. I remember pulling up to the house, realizing it was nothing like I was imagining in my head. I pictured a white picket fence family, but that isn't what answered the door. Instead, I was met with a striking woman wearing what looked like bohemian pants that were too flowy for me. The dirty blonde hair was piled on the top of her head with a blue claw clip. She was bubbly when she invited me inside, and she waved my mother off. The interior of the house was painted in dark greens and had several plants littered throughout. The dad rarely made his presence known, barely coming out from his office. The woman introduced herself as Missy, and her 2 kids were Lily and Landon. They were 8-year-old twins, and while I never asked, I assumed identical judging on appearance. Both of them seemed equally unimpressed by my arrival, giving knowing looks between each other when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Missy was still flitting around her house while spouting house rules and assuring me that I could eat whatever they had available, and that they would try to be back at a reasonable hour, that all important numbers were on the counter. The last parting words she spoke were simple reminders that neither twin had any allergies, no medical problems, and that if they got too wired up before bed, their pediatrician okayed the use of melatonin. I nodded and made mental notes of the information flying my way, trying not to usher them out of their own house. Once they left, I closed the door and locked both of the locks right away. Turning around, the twins stood at the base of the stairs, just watching me. Neither one of them spoke to me, opting to retreat into the living room and plop down in front of the television. It was weird, sure,
but I thought it was just their annoyance at having a strange girl in their home to boss them around. I let them lead the way, following behind to take a seat on the opposite couch. I rotated my gaze between the two of them and the television. Satisfied that they were fine right where they were, I jumped when a piercing scream came from the screen. They had turned on Halloween, and Michael Myers was in the middle of a hot pursuit with Jamie Lee Curtis. Shooting up, I grabbed the remote from the coffee table and switched it to something more age-appropriate. The last thing I needed were two kids having nightmares the entire night. I'd never be invited back. They gave me the obligatory huff of disapproval as they settled back down. It remained silent except for the talk of the kids on the screen, until a noise came from upstairs. It was a soft thud, almost like something falling onto a carpet. I looked to the ceiling and back, but if the kids heard it, they never let on. 2 seconds later, it sounded like a shuffle of feet above us. I felt my muscles tense as I sat there debating the next move. I decided I would just ask them if they heard anything, but to my shock, they both said no. Nothing else, just no. The evening continued as normal, jumping between snacks and making sure the kids brushed their teeth. Them both being older helped tremendously, knowing that I wasn't having to micromanage. At 9 p.m., both kids had happily dozed off on the couch, watching some cartoon about a purple dog. Things had been relatively normal up until that point, making it possible to assume that whatever I heard earlier was just the house settling. I lost myself again into a book that I had brought along for a situation like this and curled up into the recliner. I made it 3 chapters until another noise. This time, it sounded louder, like something being thrown into the ground. Slamming the book shut, I popped up onto my feet. The twins were still motionless on the sofa, snoring away. My heart was racing, and I could feel my mouth turning to cotton. I still had the parents' number, but I didn't want to ruin a date night. Bracing myself with a few deep breaths, I made my way to the foot of the steps and peered into the shadowy darkness. I wasn't able to see much before I realized I was going to have to go upstairs. Dread was coursing through my veins as I ascended the steps, graciously realizing that a single nightlight was lighting the hall from a wall plug. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I did a few sweeps across the hall until my eyes landed on a shattered picture frame that was in the center of the hallway. I picked it up and looked for glass that potentially shot across the floor, but nothing. I flipped the frame over and saw a couple standing there. The couple were in their later years, both wearing church clothes. The woman was dressed in a blue knee-length dress, and the man wore suit pants and a button-down top with a bow tie. I couldn't make much else out in the photo due to the lighting, but I placed it on a table that sat at the far end of the hall, just to get it out of the floor. I almost laughed at myself, until I heard it. The noise was ear-splitting from where I was standing, and the vibrations I felt through the floor told me that whatever happened, it was right behind me. For once, I didn't want to turn around, but I had to in order to get back to ground level and check on the kids. Slowly, I pivoted to look back down the hallway, and to my horror, saw steps that had unfolded from the ceiling, landing behind me. That was the clash I heard. I took a few hesitant steps closer, being aware to not step too close to them. It was the steps that led to attics, that much I knew. I also knew that those didn't just fall normally. I circled around them until I was at the base of the last step, staring at the gaping hole it left in the wall. An awful screeching noise flowed through the opening, causing goosebumps to form on my arms. I wanted to leave the house instantly, but I was also curious to see what secrets were hidden away. At the base, I lifted one foot to the step, about to head up. "I wouldn't do that." A boy's voice came from the top of the staircase that led to the first floor. I turned to see both of them standing there, just looking at me. They weren't bothered by the noises. I couldn't find the words I wanted to say, so I just gawked at them. "They don't like it when we go up there." That was the only thing they would offer up. I even tried to explain that I needed to close the door back, but they were adamant that I shouldn't touch it. Even when I tried, they came alive with panic. It took a few tries, but when I saw that their mind was made up, I walked back down with them and tucked them back onto the sofa. I remained in the recliner until a few minutes past midnight when the front door opened. I had never been happier to see a family return home in my life. I stood up to greet them, and when I mentioned the steps, it was the oddest sight. It was like they knew about it. They just exchanged looks until the dad cleared his throat and offered to take me home. I agreed because I was too fearful to even attempt to walk, even if it was only a few streets away. As we made the turn onto my street, I resolved I wouldn't babysit there again anyway, and looked at the father. "What was that?" His hands tightened on the wheel until we parked in the drive, and he looked at me. His eyes were tired, bags now visible on the skin below. "It's nothing. The kids think there's some evil entity in a blue dress that stays up there. One time they even thought it was their grandmother. Now it's just evil. A normal kid's imagination." Breath left my lungs as I remembered the photo that had fallen from the wall. I fumbled the door trying to get out of his car and raced into my own house, locking myself inside. I'm not one to get carried away in all that stuff, but I will say that I never went back there after that. I also don't doubt the kids, but whatever was causing those steps to come crashing down inches behind me, I don't think it was their beloved grandmother.